Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Feldenkrais Move Better, Feel Better Summit. My name is Lavinia Plonka, and I'm the co-host for the summit. And I'm delighted to be the host for this particular track, which is called Move Your Brain. We're looking at aging from many different perspectives. And my guest for now is Dan Clurman, who has been a Feldenkrais practitioner for many, many years and has worked not just with the Feldenkrais method, but has worked with different disciplines from Tai Chi to what he calls somatic inquiry. He's also done a lot of work with mindfulness and meditation at the Spirit Rock Center. He's taught at Esalen. And I've been kind of following Dan's work for quite a while, and I'm actually really excited to have a conversation with him about how the Feldenkrais method can help us with aging, and also how he has integrated his various disciplines into the process of helping people move better and feel better. So Dan, welcome to the summit. I'm so glad to see you.
Thanks, Lavinia. I'm happy to be here.
Good. So my first question might seem a little out of left field, but I was just so kind of tickled when I was reading in your bio that you started teaching seniors when you were in your 20s. And so what does it feel like now that you've kind of entered into that realm, into that dimension? How has your teaching evolved, and what kind of wisdom have you acquired over the years in terms of how to bring the work to that population?
It's a wonderful question to reflect on. When I was in my 20s, I was drawn to working with older people, that people in their 60s, and I had friends who were in their 90s at that time, partly as a desire to understand the wisdom of that cycle of life, that phase of life. Although it was really hard to do when I was in my 20s. I was really had the mindset of a 20-year-old in my 20s. However, it did give me a foretaste of the kinds of explorations that come with that period of life, and also some of the challenges and issues. And throughout my career, I've always worked with that age group in some form. When I was younger, I worked with them in a holistic health organization, the SAGE Project, teaching meditation, Tai Chi, movement. And then it just kept going when I got involved with Feldenkrais. That was a natural for this, since it's so good for aging. The way that it's affected me is now I'm actually in more of that phase of life. And as someone once said, until you actually live through something, you don't really exactly know what it's about. So now I'm getting to live through that phase and can feel physically how that affects me personally, can feel the changes that occur physically. And I think I have an appreciation more for the existential issues of getting older.
You know, you just reminded me of a story of something that happened to me when I was teaching at one of the OLLI, the Osher Institute places, about the benefits of the Feldenkrais method for aging. And I was doing all these movements and rolling around on the floor, and all of these people were looking at me. And finally, this woman raised her hand and she went, "How old are you?" And of course, I thought of myself as quite old at the time. I remember I was 55, and I went, "Well, I'm 55." And she went, "Wait till you're 85." And I never forgot that, because we really don't understand until we've been there exactly what you said. But maybe you can talk a little bit about how the Feldenkrais, because obviously people were interested and they do benefit. They benefited from my classes. And can you talk a little bit about how the Feldenkrais method can help us? We're all going to age, but how can we use this process to age more gracefully?
Yes, I think that one of the key benefits of the Feldenkrais method is that it helps people to repattern movements and to get out of certain kinds of habits that are not as productive over time, physical habits and mental habits, But I think what happens for many people is they just keep doing certain types of uh, movement patterns that over time are not as adaptive as when they first introduced those habits at a younger age. I think of people who go to the gym and try to work out with the same kind of intensity or effort in their exercise routines that they had when they were in their 30s. And then when they're in their 50s or 60s, that just doesn't work in the same way. They need to be more careful about how they move so they don't injure themselves. So I think Feldenkrais method, first of all, uses a very gentle approach. So you're not really having to stress or strain yourself at all. In fact, it's just the opposite. The lighter, easier, less effort you use, you often get greater gains. So that's surprising for people when they encounter that, but it often works really well for people who have more limited kinds of movement. And also it is something that encourages learning, awareness of how you do what you do. And for many people, as they get older, they need to be more attentive to that. They can't yank open a door the way they used to, or even reach for a cup in the on the shelf the way they used to, or even garden in the ways that they used to. And Feldenkrais lessons, I've found as I work with older people, help them revisit these normal activities and do them in a way that's more appropriate for where they are now with their own physicality.
It's interesting, this word you used as you were talking, the word adaptive, that as people age, they don't use movements that are well adapted. Can you say that again? Because I think that the whole idea, a lot of times people feel that when they hear about adaptive movement, it means that they have to limit themselves, that they have to close their world off, that they have to get smaller inside. And I know that we can think about adaptive movement as maybe more intelligent, but tell me a little bit more about what you meant by that.
I'll give you an example. I mean, one woman who was in her 80s, who was in my one of my awareness to movement classes, the Feldenkrais lessons, avid gardener, and was having wrist pain and shoulder pain. And we did a series of lessons that had to do with how the use of the hands connect into the core of the body, particularly the ribs and the pelvis. Mm-hmm. And she discovered that the way she was gardening was using a lot of extra effort in her wrists to yank out weeds or to shovel, and that her hands and her arms weren't really connected into the larger structures of her body, which are more of the power centers for the body. The rib cage, the pelvis, those are big bony structures. And when she started to do that and started to make that connection, her whole way of gardening changed. She didn't use her wrists to power all the movements. She started to feel like she could drive the movements more from what people sometimes refer to as their core. But the lesson showed her how to do that experientially, and it was a gradual process of adapting to using these different types of movement patterns from the ones that she'd been using for 20 years before.
Right. So we could say that adaptive, to use adaptive movement, is actually to maybe be more intelligent about how we move, and that when we're younger, we have more muscle mass, we have more flexibility, and so we tend to rely on the joints, the smaller joints and things, and that as we get older, that doesn't mean that a younger person couldn't also move more intelligently. Oh. But the idea of applying that kind of intelligence so that I can continue to do what I want to do, not adapt and say, oh, well, I can't garden anymore, but can I garden in a more intelligent way? So
I think that's right. I think intelligence the body has a type of operating intelligence, you could say, as a total system. And when we talk about adaptive, for her, this woman, it was really using more of the resources of the whole body and having a more coordinated sense of movement that allowed her to distribute the work of the gardening throughout her entire structure, her whole body. And that certainly could be something we can learn at an earlier age. I mean, in earlier age, we often just can power through things and have a certain kind of resilience and don't think about it. But I think I found from my own work with Feldenkrais that I'm pretty sure it prevented a lot of injuries for me if I had kept my old habits going.
Right. Yeah, I found because I was studying Feldenkrais while I was still in my performing career. And I found that after doing the Feldenkrais training, I actually was a better performer, even though I was much older than I did before, because I was using less effort, less energy, less compulsion. So it does show us that we can do a lot more. You do something else though when you're, and sometimes you combine it in your Feldenkrais classes, don't you? Something called somatic inquiry. And could you talk a little bit about that and how you integrate that?
Sure. So somatic inquiry is really a form of extending what one does in Feldenkrais to be a little bit more aware of the ways in which the different regions of the body can be resources for other regions of the body. We do this all the time, like you fall and bruise your knee, you put your hands on your knee to soothe the knee in that area and bring some warmth. And that's one part of the body serving as a resource for an injured part of the body. What Feldenkrais lessons tend to do is they sensitize you, which we'll demonstrate, to the ways in which the different parts of the body can cooperatively help each other in functioning. That's in the earlier example I gave, that woman who was gardening was able to use the larger structures of her torso to drive, to be the power drivers for her hands. That's an example of one part of the body serving as a resource for the other. With somatic inquiry, you're going even further and asking the body to provide resources for another region of the body. You actually inquire, and then you, in a meditative way, listen and notice what is offered. And this is more of a meditative type of activity. It's similar to a type of a discipline called focusing, which the psychologist Eugene Gendlin created a long time ago, in which you're getting a felt sense of a particular region and you're following that felt sense and what it's providing to you, what it's giving you.
So when you integrate this, do you integrate it while you are teaching awareness through movement classes, or does it happen spontaneously? All of a sudden you go, I think that the class needs some somatic inquiry, or do you have, is it part of a plan?
It can be part of a plan in lessons. And what I've been doing since I started to work with this is structuring it into lessons, sometimes to a greater degree, sometimes to a lesser degree. And I'll have some lessons of this posted on my site for people who want to explore it as well. So I have been building it in. And what I do is I gradually layer in the somatic inquiry after people have been involved in a lesson and started to tune into the ways in which the different regions of the body participate with each other. So it's a gradual layering in. And I don't do it in every lesson. I do it sometimes when the group seems to call for it.
Right. So you don't have like a workshop that specifically is about that. It's kind of the process that you do. I get it. Well, I know that you wanted to actually share that process with the group and give people who are watching an opportunity to experience it. And it's interesting because the lesson that we were talking about is a lesson that people have been kind of sharing in different ways in some of the other interviews that I've been doing. And so I think it's really wonderful that we're going to be able to use the same exploration of flexion and extension, but looking at it from your perspective and then adding this other element in. So I don't know, would you
Sure.
like to give it a
Let's
try?
start.
And I'm going to be your subject, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to leave myself on camera for this, and I will do my best. It's sitting in a chair, right? So
Sitting in
people
a
don't hear
chair, and probably works best when you're sitting in the chair and you start the lesson to move a little bit forward in the chair so your back isn't pressing against the chair. Although, as with all Feldenkrais lessons, you can make the adjustments that you need to make so that you're comfortable.
Mhm.
And that, of course, you never do any movements that don't feel comfortable for you. If you find you're doing something and it doesn't feel quite right, then you can just stop and imagine doing the movement, and that'll bring benefits too. So it's always important to attend to your comfort. So with this lesson, the advantage of this lesson is it also helps you to sit up more comfortably. So it's one that we can use quite a bit these days.
Certainly can.
Being on Zoom. So just sitting forward a little bit in your chair, feet are flat on the floor, hands are on your thighs, and your back is away from the back of the chair, and just feel the contact of your sit bones with the chair as you're sitting there, just the sensations of that. And to feel the contact of your feet with the floor as well. And to have your legs be apart from each other in a way that feels comfortable for you, where you don't feel cramped, you feel like you have space. Sometimes making little adjustments is a way to tune that up. So just comfort is what we're looking for, ease. And then once you have that sense of the contact of your pelvis with the chair and your feet with the floor, do a very light movement of just looking up a little bit towards the ceiling and coming back. And for those of you, if you're doing this in front of a computer screen, it's distracting, you can always turn away from the computer screen and just sit looking at a wall. So that sometimes that can be problematic for people when they're looking at a screen. So you're just looking up a little bit. And as you look up and come back, just to notice where you feel that movement occurring in you, just to notice which part of you. And this is a beginning reference movement in a lesson to just revisit it later to see how the lesson affects this. And on one of these times of looking up, pick a spot on the wall or the ceiling that shows where you come to when you're comfortably, not straining, not trying to go to the end of the movement, just comfortably going up and coming back. And you can feel which parts of you feel the movement in. Good, and come back again. And just rest for a moment. And resting is a very important part of any lesson. It lets you absorb the kinds of effects and the things that you're learning in the lesson. And now, take one hand and put it, the back of the hand, it could be either one, on your lower lumbar spine, the back of your hand, so you can feel that area. And this is just to sense that area. And the other hand, the palm on your sternum of your chest. And do a very light movement of just tilting your pelvis a little bit forward and feeling the hand on your sternum starting to rise up a little bit as you tilt the pelvis forward, and then letting that come back and feeling how the sternum comes down as you come back to your starting position. And just do that a couple of times. And feel how that connection between the pelvis tilting and your upper ribs moving occurs. And you'll feel there's a connectedness there. As the pelvis tilts and you get a little more of an arch in your back, you can feel probably those ribs coming up. And you can take your hands away once you have a sense of this and put them back on your thighs and let that go for a moment and just sense the effects of that.
Should we have eyes open or closed?
You can have your eyes closed or open. And when you rest, certainly possible to have your eyes shut. And here we'll start to introduce the first part of the somatic inquiry process, which is after doing a few movements that are connecting, bring your awareness to just sensing the presence of your whole body as you sit here. So often our attention is drawn to a particular region of the body. It might be where there's discomfort, or might be by habit, a way of checking in on ourselves. And here you're just noticing the field of the body, however it appears to you. Certain regions might be more populated by sensations than others, or feel denser. And notice if there are any regions of yourself that are drawing your attention, which you seem to be drawn to. You don't have to even know why. You just notice they pop up in your awareness. So this is a very welcoming type of attitude. You're just simply being with what presents itself. And then become aware of the natural rhythm of your breathing. The inhalation and the exhalation, which happens all on its own. It's your unique rhythm, intimately connected with just being alive.
What is it about the impulse when someone asks you to pay attention to something to immediately feel like you need to correct it?
Right, that can come up, and that is sometimes something we've been taught to do. You know, if you sense, for example, the way you're sitting or a part of yourself, and you know, you've been told when you were younger, sit up straight. And it's like you just sense, wait a minute, I'm not straight. I need to raise my shoulders up more. But in this case, you can just notice that, and you don't need to do anything about it. However, you might spontaneously notice, when I just tilted my pelvis, I notice if I tilt it this way a little bit more, I feel, that actually feels a little bit better to me. So there are those types of things that occur where the lesson is already starting to yield certain insights, and that's fine too. Okay, so you have a sense of that? And perhaps you had a sense of wanting to correct something?
Well, actually, it was my breath that I wanted to correct. When you said notice your breath, I was like, well, how was I breathing? Let me figure it out. You know.
So sure, yeah, that can occur.
There's certainly an awareness of a part that attracts my attention. Yes.
Good. Okay, just to notice that. That's the first part of the inquiry. And now let's continue with the Feldenkrais movement patterning. And that would be where now, as you tilt your pelvis a little bit forward and feel your sternum rise, let your head ride on that, so you actually start to look up and then come back down in coordination with the tilting of your pelvis and your ribs and sternum rising a little bit. So the head is not operating independently. Now your head is finding its relationship to your pelvis and ribs. And it's almost like a little conversation these regions of yourself are having. So the idea here is not to make the most extreme or biggest movement. It's really to let the coordination and the conversation between these regions inform how you're doing the movement. And then let that movement connect with your breathing. So you're naturally inhaling and exhaling, and you just let the movement ride with the breath so that you can accommodate the movement as much as feels okay to the natural rhythm of your breathing. So the breath and the movement support each other. And you might need to slow the movement down or even pause to connect with your breathing. The size of the movement is utterly unimportant here. It's just the connectedness. And sometimes you need to make the movements a little smaller, or maybe go back and forth through a part of the movement. Yeah, so internally you have the sense of the connectedness occurring. And you can pause and rest anytime you wish. And then just pause for a moment, sit back in your chair and take a full rest. And here is another aspect of somatic inquiry. In Feldenkrais lessons, you often will rest during sequences of the lesson. And in adding somatic inquiry, you rest and you have the sense of absorbing what you've been doing. That is, just letting what you've been doing wash over you, over the whole field of the body, and noticing if there are any sorts of ripple effects, you could say, where certain regions of yourself are responding or becoming more aware to you, where you're just making connections to other parts of yourself. Maybe it's happening, maybe it isn't, but you're in a welcoming mode of just taking it in, just noticing how it is. It's important to remember that you don't have to make anything happen with this. You're just in a receptive mode of noticing what's happening. So this activity of just resting, absorbing the effects of the movements, noticing how the movements affect the whole field of the body, is helping you become sensitized to the different regions of yourself. And in that sense, to perhaps starting to notice if there are any regions that might be resources for you in some way, that might be useful. You don't have to know what they are, but you're just opening up your field of awareness to this. And now we'll add one more variation to the movements of the awareness through movement lesson, and then we'll expand the somatic inquiry part of it. So here, once again, you sit a little bit further away from the back of the chair, feel the connection of your pelvis with the chair, your feet with the floor, the hands are on the thighs. And now you're going to add a bit of a non-stereotypic movement to this, which is very typical in Feldenkrais, which is as you tilt your pelvis slightly forward and you feel your sternum coming up and your head starting to go up, you let your eyes start to look down and then come back to your neutral starting position. So this is something that might be challenging to do because often the eyes go with the movement of the head. And you can let your jaw relax as you do this, because sometimes we tend to tense our jaws or face since this is such a different pattern. And you can do it even less so that it's easier for you. Maybe you just do the first 10 to 15% of the movement, and that's where it feels easier to do. And also allow yourself to not know how to do this. That's really important. It can be a discovery process.
Is it cheating to start with your eyes already looking down?
Sometimes that's how sometimes that's how people actually can take themselves into this. So I would say no, or sometimes people move their heads up and then they look down. Any way you do it to start to launch into it's fine. As you get more into this and you practice it, then you can play with actually coordinating as you did with the head and the pelvis coordination, that as your head and body starts to drift up, your eyes at the same time start to look down so that they're coordinating in this very unusual pattern.
And of course, if you have your eyes closed, nobody knows how you're doing it, right?
Right. And you can still do this with your eyes closed. That's perfectly fine because you're still going to shift that pattern. Right.
It actually feels easier when you're not looking at something.
Then that's perfectly fine. So that's what your body suggested as a possibility. You can go with it. And then let it go and just pause for a moment in this position. That's plenty just to do that. And the idea of using the eyes in what's called an oppositional movement is that in some ways it shuffles the deck. It changes the pattern that's so habitual. And we'll see how this affects the next movements you do. Sometimes it frees up resources. So when you're ready, sensing internally your own sense of ready to do the movement, let yourself combine the different movement patterns that we've been doing, which is tilting the pelvis forward, feeling the ribs and sternum starting to rise, letting the head start to look up, and then looking up with the eyes in coordination with everything else and coming back. And notice how that little pattern that we did of changing the eyes and coming back into it again, how that affects your sense of internal coordination between your pelvis, your ribs, your head, your eyes, neck. And notice how you feel the looking up now. Which parts of you seem to be getting involved in this pattern now? And that's just the pattern of looking up, whether with your eyes closed or open, doesn't matter. Where do you feel the movement distributing itself through you now? And you can pause as you are anytime and just simply absorb the effects of this. That's fine, that's good enough. And then just open up to the field of awareness of the whole body again and notice the different regions of yourself. You can notice if any other areas of your body have become prominent in your awareness. You can always attune to the natural rhythm of your breathing. And then opening your eyes and just sitting naturally. A few times, simply look up towards the ceiling as you did initially and come back and notice, has anything changed in the way in which you're looking up or how far you look up or the participation of other parts of yourself in the movement from when you first did this? Maybe you could say a little bit about what you notice.
I'm hyper aware of the differences on the two sides of myself, which I was not that clear about when we began. I definitely feel like it's less, there's less effort and more availability. And the mystery of, well, I don't feel like I'm doing anything different, but I can definitely see further. So that's always a nice feeling. I have personally a question about the role of the neck, because we've got the pelvis, we've got the sternum, and then the head. And so the question is, how does the neck fit in there? So that's just a question I have in there.
Sure. Right. Well, as you I don't know if you were aware of it, but when I was looking initially, you used your neck quite a bit to tilt your head up. And as I'm watching you at the end of the lesson, of course, these other regions of yourself are giving you a boost in a certain sense. Mm-hmm. So I would say, is there a way for you to look up and do even less with your neck, to let your head look up and just feel like your pelvis and your ribs are giving you the main impetus to look up, and your head is just riding along with them and coming back with them. so that there's even less effort in your neck. And you have that sense of greater ease in looking up through the use of your pelvis and your ribs.
So it's interesting, right? We very rarely, unless we have neck pain, really feel like we're overusing our neck. But that last time, as you spoke, there was this little bit of more clarity right at the top of my shoulder girdle where kind of the chest ends and the neck begins.
Mm-hmm.
That there is a place that I would want to explore further. But we don't have to do that during this interview.
Okay, but that would not be an unusual byproduct of doing the lesson, as you realize, oh, something could be really fine-tuned here in the amount of effort or work or the way I'm using that part of myself. So that certainly would be a setup for more exploration. Now we'll add the somatic inquiry part of this. So as you can see, the aspects of this lesson, the variations of movement patterns, have in a sense connected the different regions of yourself, perhaps a bit more fully than when we started. And that helps you develop the sensory acuity, the sensory awareness of these different regions and how they connect. Now we'll go back to just noticing the whole field of the body. And you mentioned that your attention was drawn to a particular region. And you can open it up again and just ask, is there any region, whether it be that one that you noticed originally or any other region in yourself, might be the area of your neck that you mentioned, which could use some additional resources to help it feel better, to move more easily in some particular way. And you just open your awareness up to the whole field of the body and just put the question out. It's an inquiry question that you're asking of yourself, of your whole organism, and notice if any part of you signals you in some way. Might be an image, might be some tingling, could be a feeling of warmth, or whatever way you get that message is perfectly fine. You don't have to understand it. You might just be intuitively drawn there.
So let me just clarify what I'm trying. I have an awareness of a part of myself that feels, for me, you said attracts my attention, and for me it feels perhaps not as comfortable as other parts of me.
Sure.
And then I'm asking the question, is there another part of me that could be a resource for that?
That's the second step. The first step is just locating the area that wants the resource, which you've done, I think.
Okay, I got that.
Okay, now part two is just asking the question, is there a region of myself, a part of me, that can offer a resource to this area? And I can give you examples when we're done with this of how clients have worked with this. But just you're putting it out and noticing if any area is signaling you. And you don't have to understand how it could be a resource. You're just getting a sense that some area is volunteering for this.
Okay.
And you can say if you've located that area. And it might not even seem like it makes sense. It could just be, that's odd. This area is signaling.
Well, I guess, I guess that's it. It's like, how does one, something did appear in my head and a sensation, but it's like, is that the right one?
That is the right one. That's fine. Yes, you can go with it and see how it helps.
Okay.
Yeah, so when you get that region, that area, you can say what it is if you want, just so people will have a sense of if you wish.
I'm fine with that if it would be helpful. I mean, what I had sensed was that there's for some reason my right hip or my right sit bone, that whole area is not in a clear contact with the chair, no matter how hard I try, and it feels kind of tight there.
Mm-hmm.
So then when I asked the question, for some reason, I just became incredibly aware of this area of my shoulder girdle. That's all. It's just like, it's like it was going, hi, how are you? But I have no idea how they would connect.
That's fine. That's enough. And that's really not unusual. That's the way it is for most people when they do somatic inquiry. Some region pops up and makes itself known. Now, the next step, step 3, is you give that region that you found in your left shoulder permission to be of assistance to the area in your right hip. Let them connect in whatever way they wish to. And sometimes people do it by just imagining the two areas connecting, or feeling how the two areas connect, or giving a verbal permission, go ahead and find your connection. And then you follow that. You let yourself move or micro adjust in your seat, or you feel perhaps a tingling of sensations transferring, or a sense of changing in your breathing or your posture, and you just let them find their connection with each other and notice what happens. And you sort of don't try to make anything happen. You're just letting the resources connect to each other in the same way you let the resources of the pelvis and the ribs and the eyes connect. Here you're just letting it connect internally. And then just noticing what happens and going with it. And if a movement pattern suggests itself to you, you can explore that. Here's where you can be creative as this unfolds. You let what's suggested unfold within you. So I notice you're doing a little dynamic weight shifting. That would be something that naturally could occur.
Again, the impulse to want to correct or adjust or improve without really knowing the whole picture is, it's a challenging temptation, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, if something though does seem to spontaneously start happening, which I'm seeing as sort of micro adjusting in your posture, that's okay, and you don't need to at this point think of it as trying to improve. I think of it more as being playful with what's being presented, and that's okay at this stage, because now you're in a more of a discovery mode. So you don't have to worry about that tendency to move and change things. That's actually part of the process. And at any point along the way, if you wanted to note what you're experiencing, that could be useful.
Well, it's a couple of things that probably can't be necessarily addressed here. but I feel something resistant in the left side of my thoracic spine right here, like it actually kind of starts to ache a little bit as I kind of think about the relationship. And then there's also a sense of a tremendous amount of resistance on the right shoulder area, as if it's saying, you're not allowed to go there. You're not allowed.
You're not allowed to go to
the right. In other words,
I see.
To exaggerate it. And of course I can make that happen, but the feeling is that left thoracic area is literally uncomfortable, and that this part is pushing in this way.
Suppose you were to decrease the pushing into it and actually go a little bit in the opposite direction to adjust.
I wasn't even pushing into it. It was just this feeling of don't you dare.
I see. Okay.
but yeah, I mean, my impulse, and that helps lift that hip up, and I mean, then I'm even more in my pattern for sure.
Right. And then you use that going in the opposite direction, and then use that as the lead in to just gently make a suggestion in the direction. So you're not right. You're using where you go comfortably to advance a tiny bit into the new pattern, the new direction, and let all the other parts of yourself adjust to that in the way that they do. So you're not doing too much. You're staying right within the range of what's enough.
I noticed my right hand wanting to do something.
Okay, what does it want to do?
Well, I just noticed that as I was, concentrating on all this, the right hand was like getting busy without, so as if it could participate in this somehow.
Sure. And if the right hand wants to participate in some way, you can let that happen too. So this is not unusual. The different regions of yourself are starting to become actively involved in this pattern. And at some point, if you wish, you can always stop and just check in and see what's it like now. This is just the beginning of this process. Sometimes this unfolds for quite a bit for people. Sometimes, there's a stopping point. So you can just simply stop and rest and take it in and come back to noticing the whole field of the body again. And notice, you talked about the attention being drawn to the right side of your pelvis, the left shoulder. You can check in with that now and just notice how that is.
So it's slightly different. And again, I don't expect it to be a huge change in this short of a time. I think that, a question that's come up for me, that's probably coming up for some of the people who are watching this is, well, how do you do this in a group? Because you and I almost feel like what we're doing is, a private session.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So when I do this in a group, we're doing it in a far more individualized way. I'll put out those questions though. Is there a region of yourself that is seeking a resource? It's a general question. People don't have to say anything. Some people, yes, some people, no. Then a little bit later in the lesson, is there a region that is offering to be a resource? Let them speak to each other in whatever way they do. And then I check in with people at the end of the lesson, and people can report on it as they wish. So there's been a lot of interesting things that happen for people when they do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've also done it with clients too. Some people get immediate suggestions, like they have an area. Often people are drawn to areas that have pain, which is, especially with older population, there's areas that have pain. So that's comes up almost immediately. And then some area will suggest itself as a resource. People will often have this sense of, it's so surprising. Why would that happen? And then they connect and something happens. So I'll give you an example of how individually how this has affected people so you can hear how it works, because it's an unusual process. One person I did this had kind of insomnia basically, and found that she couldn't get to sleep at night, or if she woke up would have a hard time going back to sleep because she was worried about going back to sleep. So the worry about sleeping was creating a lot of thinking about worrying about sleeping. Mm-hmm. Not an uncommon pattern for people who have insomnia. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, so how do you experience that region? And she said, it's like my head is buzzing. I have this buzzing sensation in my head from being so concentrated. So that was the region that wanted assistance. So I said, open to the field of the body, or ask if there's a region. And she said, oddly, my feet just popped in. And I said, really? So just any part of your feet? She said, well, my feet, and particularly the bottom of my feet and my heels. So I said, okay, why don't you let those two connect, your head and your heels and your feet, and let's just see what happens and let them connect however they wish. So when she did that, she said that immediately the sense of being in her head and occupied with her head shifted. The buzzing started to die down, and she shifted more into her chest and started to shift towards her abdomen. That's like where she was locating herself more, the sensations. And it felt great because there was a kind of this relaxation of this buzzing quality. Then she said, though, this is great, but I'm afraid when we stop doing this, it won't be enough. I'll go right back up again. So I said, okay, why don't you ask if there's another region of yourself that could be of assistance as an adjunct to this first region? And she was willing to do that because the first thing was so dramatic, the way the change occurred. So she did that, and then almost immediately, the palms of her hands popped in. And her hands were just lying by her sides. And she said, that's really odd. They just showed up as being available. I don't even know why or what that's about. So I said, okay, why don't you let your hands now join in with your feet in making the connection into your head and see what effect that has. And then as she started to do that, within a minute or two, the sense of filling out her whole body started to happen. She felt like she was now feeling the presence of her lower body and her legs and connecting into her feet and spreading out into her arms. And her head really decreased and the thinking started to drop out dramatically. And she said, I actually feel a little drowsy, like I could start to go back to sleep. And we had recorded that, and that became a session to practice with. And that just became a mode of using somatic inquiry as a way to help launch into more of a sleep pattern. And the body had suggested that, that was just unusually, wasn't in her repertoire.
One of the things that I think is very interesting and valuable for working with this with an older population is that we do have a lot of people who come in who do have severe movement limitations, at least when they begin. And this is an opportunity to be able to improve things without, sort of like taking Moshe's idea of imagination another step in another direction, so that I'm not just imagining myself doing a movement, but I'm actually going inside and sensing my relationship to myself. And then through that these people could begin to, we could begin to improve our movement as well. So have you found
Yes.
doing this that people are able to then go into, say, more challenging Feldenkrais lessons?
Yes. As people develop that sense of awareness of the different regions of themselves, it changes their whole relationship to embodiment in a sense. They actually feel more present as the whole body. And one of the things I found, I worked for a while with a psychologist named Judith Blackstone, who developed this type of meditation of inhabiting the body. It's called the realization process. Is that in many ways, I think just part of our social life, we get partitioned off from parts of ourselves. It's almost like we become compartmentalized in our physicality and our embodiment. And this somatic inquiry coupled with the Feldenkrais lessons becomes a way of actually fully inhabiting yourself, you could say, or more fully. And with the process of aging, it's a wonderful experience for many of the people I've worked with, because it gives them a renewed sense of contact with themselves physically, and a sense of the richness of the body, and you could say that the life of the body, which is our main vehicle of life. So there's a kind of renewal for some people that starts to happen with this, and a sense of interconnectedness, a sense of unification throughout themselves that often comes at the end of these lessons. People will say, I just feel like I'm here in a completely different way. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when we bring the eyes into it, they'll report standing up, and the visual field has changed. They've gone from a more concentric focus into focusing out into the periphery, or having a global focus. So there's a lot of byproducts.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking as you were speaking also that this process could be applied in life. In other words, that it's great to come to Feldenkrais classes, but how, you could use this, or maybe you have more suggestions actually for how people can continue to practice when they're not in class
Mm.
so that they can continue to improve.
Yes, well, I think that's a natural part of doing Feldenkrais lessons over time, the awareness through movement lessons particularly, is that you start to develop a sensitivity to the way in which the different parts of yourself do want to connect with each other. And that sensitivity is almost like, it's a type of intelligence, you could say, the body's intelligent ways of organizing itself for action and perception. And it starts to pervade all different parts of life. And the way sometimes people report on this is they'll be sitting in their chair, and we've done a lesson like we did today, and at their computer, maybe during a Zoom session or something, and they'll suddenly realize, wait a minute, my head is not in a good relationship with my pelvis. And they'll just do a little micro adjusting, and they'll realize, oh, I'm like habitually looking down. I'm not even looking up. And when I look up, now that frees up my spine. So that becomes more of a normal thing rather than just something you only get when you're taking a Feldenkrais class. Mm-hmm. Or it's simple things like someone's reaching to open a cabinet door, and they realize, wait a minute, I'm just reaching only with my hand. The rest of me is anchored here. It's not moving. And then they'll rotate a little bit with their body to reach into it, because we've done lessons that connect the arms with the ribs. So that awareness picks up speed over time and just becomes, I would say, more a normal part of life for people.
So to me, that awareness is and maybe you'll disagree with me, but it's a little bit different, or is it, than what some people call mindfulness?
Great question. Yes. It's a little bit different in that, and I teach meditation and Feldenkrais at Spirit Rock in Esalen. I've done that and have a retreat in the fall at another place, Wonderwell in New Hampshire. The difference is that mindfulness is certainly an important aspect. It's an important aspect of that awareness. But with Feldenkrais, you're experimenting with bringing movement patterns in. And you're being a little more improvisational and noticing what happens when you try out different movement patterns. And you're being quite conscious of how you connect up through yourself as you're taking an action, or as you're turning to look at something, or how your breathing influences the way you move. You're being very attentive to the effects of how you function as you're mindful.
So how is it different from mindfulness again?
Well, because with mindfulness, you might not be as attentive to the functional movement patterns and how they're influencing the way you organize yourself for action during the day. You might notice that you're aware of moving. You might notice that you're aware of lifting one foot up and putting it down. You might notice that you're hearing a sound, but you wouldn't necessarily be noticing how your ribs relate to your arms as you reach for that coffee cup on the shelf. And how you could play with that, how you could improve the functioning of that pattern of moving.
So that proprioceptive kinesthetic kind of sensation is different than the practice of mindfulness.
It's, I think it's an extension, an addition, with the aim of looking for ways to change the patterning and experiment with the patterning of how you do things. I think mindfulness is more of the neutral observing sense of just noticing how it is, what's going on, how experience is arising.
So when we're working from the Feldenkrais perspective, I'm adding perhaps the element of learning.
Yes, it's not to say that learning doesn't happen or insight with mindfulness. It certainly does, and you're open to the whole range of experience, thinking, feeling, sensations, hearing, seeing. But with Feldenkrais, I think you're actively engaging in these functional patterns of movement
Mhm,
as a vehicle for learning about how you do what you do.
mhm.
And that additional uh, structure, you could call it, for learning, uh, I think is something that distinguishes it from just simple mindfulness.
Yeah, I think I just figured it out for myself. I don't know if
Mm,
this, but
sure.
that you use the word neutral, that neutral observer in mindfulness, whereas what you're describing to me, at least from your perspective of Feldenkrais, is that there's a curiosity involved. And if I'm curious, then I'm not neutral.
You're curious. Well, you can be curious. Curiosity is an element of that certain becomes a faculty that's cultivated with mindfulness because you are paying close attention. And some people would equate paying close attention with a form of curiosity.
Okay.
But I think the addition is you're really playing with various movement structures that almost evoke certain types of learning. I mean, from a Feldenkrais perspective, we're constantly organizing ourselves to do things in a field of gravity.
Mhm.
And that's part of our existential learning situation. That's what we deal with when we're here. That element is highly emphasized. How do you perform actions in this gravitational field? How do you organize your perception to do these things? That focus is very prominent with the Feldenkrais lessons. I don't think it's necessarily that how do you do it is as much so with mindfulness, although it certainly could be if you wanted to.
It's just interesting, right? We could probably have had a whole other summit interview about that. So I didn't mean to take you way
Oh
off.
no, that's a good piece.
Since somatic inquiry has that quality of inquiry, I just wanted to ask you about that. So, well, we've had a great conversation, and I just wanted to know if there was anything that you wanted to add that maybe we didn't cover, or anything that you would like to say in closing.
I appreciate being able to have this conversation in this way, and your curiosity and interest in doing the exploration as we've been going through it. So I really appreciate that aspect of doing this together. And I just encourage, I guess I would encourage people to explore. There's a lot of lessons, Feldenkrais lessons. I have some on my site. There's plenty out on the YouTube now and all over to explore, and to, now that you have a sense of what this somatic inquiry is, to let yourself play with it and be experimental, and not think there has to be a necessarily a right way to do it. It's more of a discovery process for how you uniquely do it yourself. What is it that you bring to your learning as you explore how your body suggests new ways of acting, perceiving, being resourceful to itself, to have it be an open inquiry and have fun.
That's beautifully put. And it's a beautiful lead in so that I can tell viewers that if you do want to explore it, that Dan has put together a lesson that explores the movement that we were doing and somatic inquiry as a bonus that you can access just by clicking on the link below this interview. And that way you'll have an opportunity to be guided as you try to explore this new way of looking at yourself, or inside yourself, I should say. So, Dan, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Mutually, Lavinia. Thank you so much.